Mr. Schumann. He's the Professor Hes-So Valais. Please put a big round of applause for him, and he'll be sharing an idea how blockchain can be of value, suggesting that smart contracts can be used to automate the execution of agreements between actors, and the agreement process contracting can also be automated. Okay. Over to you, Mr. Schumann.
Okay, thanks for the invitation and the kind introduction and your patience time. So now can we start? Good. Okay. So first of all, kind of let me a little bit go down to the basics, debunk blockchain in the sense of, okay, let's agree it's a distributed database. That's more or less what's in its core. And by that, then, we had a long time and we asked ourselves, what are, in Switzerland, possible applications in the energy sector for such a blockchain thing? That on the one hand, it provides really a functional value add compared to just setting up a centralized database, while at the second time, also asking ourselves, where does it make sense economically? So we were searching for a field of application where it on the technical side makes sense, and where there's also a potential for a business case, actually. And honestly, we searched, actually, and we discussed different problems in the energy sector for maybe a bit more than a year, until we run into a problem where we say, there it really has a chance to make sense. And that's what I want to present to you, and also what we now plan currently to do. So I'm reporting on an ongoing project, so no final results, but see what happened at the moment in the Swiss research project. And that's about the balancing in the grid. And so maybe give you a very brief introduction in how balancing works on the Swiss side. So there are certain regions called balancing groups which have to more or less provide balancing more or less by themselves. So the idea is they give in a day ahead a forecast for what their load will be, and based on this the TSO will kind of organize general production, and then if you deviate from what you announced the day before, well, you get penalized, you have to pay. And that is more or less the starting situation. And what happened actually in the balance group we were looking at is initially they did their forecasting, and then during the day they were operating blindly. They had no idea if they were somehow following their plan or not. Actually, they were more or less informed one day later when they were communicated how much penalty they have to pay or not pay, which is from the more innovative managing side, not really the situation you would like to see. So that was problem number one, and there was a previous project where they say, okay, obviously we need to inform these regional entities about their current state and the state in the day about their disbalance. So there has been a solution developed based on capturing the data during the day, and then during the day concurrent forecasts for the next time. So we enabled those regional managers to now maybe turn on off some mini hydro, or give some incentives to be more balanced inside this regional thing to avoid paying penalties. Actually, it turned out to be not very successful, because now the information was there, but the local regulators didn't act on it. Yeah, so that was after the first being all very optimistic about we have some solution, we had to realize, well, they don't use the data. And okay, then we had to look, why are they not using the data? And the story is, they just didn't have the resources. It would require someone to look at the data, to act on it. And these entities just didn't have the policy, the habit, and also not the resources. Honestly speaking, it was just cheaper paying parts of the penalties than hiring one more expert doing the work. So in that sense, a bit more managerial speech-like, transaction costs are too high for the balancing. So, and that was when we said, okay, that would be a case where automation would actually make sense, and in particular we need to make sure that transaction costs in this automation stay low enough that it's this balancing inside becomes cheap enough so we can avoid the penalties. And that's more or less now the follow-up project I'm reporting on, is now how to automate this balancing to avoid being disbalanced, avoid paying penalties. And the blockchain part is then part of that solution. So maybe get one step back on this transaction costs. Where are these costs coming from? There are two stages. There's the contracting, and then if you have agreed on a contract, it's contract execution. And these two parts have to be automated both. We have to consider automated contracting, so coming to an agreement, and automated contract execution. And only if we can integrate those two things, we on the one hand have the capability to reduce transaction cost, while on the other hand, it has been mentioned today as well, we can scale. So we can scale in the terms of horizontal scale, so we can get down to the household level, approaching more this peer-to-peer like thing we have seen. But for the or you can scale vertically, integrating more and more of these regions. But first of all, we need to make this automation work at all, because otherwise it's a theoretical potential. So, for the automated contracting, well, there exists already research in a different field. It's a subfield of AI, the multi-agent systems. They have ideas, they investigated automated negotiations. So different software entities representing different interests, different stakeholders that have to automatically negotiate to find agreements. So this part of research exists. I'm originating from this part of research, so that was something where I was very happy to integrate something I did some years before. But that's really then, we have one software entity representing the capabilities and interests, also economic interests, of this particular company. And they have then to make the choice, is it better, do I make a good deal if I help balancing, or is it for me better if I just pay the penalty and not help me and the rest to get balanced? Which is, on the economic side, legit. From the more electric physical side, harmful, but okay, it's on the company side here. And then the second part is the automated contract execution. And there, the blockchain, in particular, the smart contracts come into place. So if we can more or less, I mean, a smart contract is just a formalization of an agreement that is so much formalized that it can be executed on the chain. So in that sense, we think combining this off-chain negotiations, because the negotiation can be computational intense. I would not put it on the chain, because then transaction costs on the chain increase. Then again, we work against our argument, we want to have low transaction costs. And the point here is having the negotiation off-chain. And when we have an agreement, we can phrase it and we can translate it into a smart contract. And then putting this smart contract on-chain, that this smart contract only contains the execution of the agreement. And if we combine those two things, then we in principle have the chance to really automate the entire thing. Now going back to the balancing groups, why is this a nice application area for this concept? Is because in the end, each balancing act only needs to agree on a very specific number of parameters. Namely, when you need to intervene, for how long, which load, which price. More or less, it's a fixed number of parameters. We have a very framed problem here, which allow us to also provide, in the sense, code templates for the smart contracts, where after you have done the agreement with the agents on these parameters, you just have to inject more or less the parameters on which you have agreed into a code template that then will become the smart contract that you can automatically put on chain. So in that sense, we interconnect the contracting, which is automated, and the contract execution, which can also be automated, having the good parts of both worlds, keeping transaction costs low, and therefore allow to have more transactions, which later on can allow us to then do scaling. So it's a pilot and demonstrator. We currently build it up. We started very recently, so we now are in the phase where we have specified the specs that our energy companies for the moment will accept. And we are now really building these things up on this, with the goal really having a prototype version that allows us this automated balancing within this region. Hoping obviously that if this works, we can then scale horizontally and vertically. So what I wanted to give as a takeaway, finding meaningful applications where we can have not only a technical benefit, but also an economic benefit for blockchains is not as easy. I mean, we have phrased it before, the blockchain is not what drives the decentralization, it's just a tool that can help coping with it. And there are applications, one has to search for them, sometimes longer. We did quite long. Maybe you are faster in that sense. But in general, it's a way, this automated contracting, to reduce really the transaction costs, which in the energy sector can be of relevance, but theoretically also in other sectors where transaction costs are limiting factors. Okay, thanks. That's it.
Thank you so much, Professor Schumann.